What happens when a father figure becomes the predator? Kevin Cannell wasn't just Sabrina Zunich's foster father. He was her groomer, her confidant, and ultimately her co-conspirator in murder. This is the story of how a troubled teenage girl was manipulated into killing the woman who had opened her home, all for the twisted promises of a man who claimed to love her. The evidence left behind reveals a chilling trail of lies, betrayal, and blood. Sabrina Zunich's childhood was marked by instability from the beginning. Her parents had criminal records, and her early years were chaotic, filled with behavioral issues that eventually led to her placement in a group home. When the Cannell family took her in, it seemed like a turning point. Lisa Cannell, her foster mother, welcomed her with open arms, offering the stability Sabrina had never known. Kevin Cannell, her foster father, played the role of a supportive figure, providing the emotional attention she craved. At first, the arrangement appeared ideal. The Cannell home was a stark contrast to the unpredictability of Sabrina's past. But beneath the surface, something darker was taking shape. Kevin didn't just act as a father figure. He crossed lines that should never have been crossed. Friends later recalled their interactions as unusually close, filled with inside jokes that carried unsettling undertones. They noticed how Kevin would casually touch Sabrina in ways that made them uncomfortable, brushing her hair behind her ear or placing his hand too low on her back. One of the most alarming signs was Kevin's habit of showing off modeling photos of Sabrina to friends and acquaintances. He would boast about their special bond, a phrase that carried a disturbing weight once the truth came out. At the time, though, Lisa remained oblivious, focusing on providing a stable home. Experts who study child psychology note that children from unstable backgrounds, like Sabrina, often crave validation to fill the voids left by neglect or trauma. This makes them prime targets for predators who offer what appears to be love and security. Kevin exploited this vulnerability. He positioned himself as the only person who truly understood Sabrina, isolating her emotionally from others who might have intervened. Research shows that grooming often begins this way: small gestures of attention, secret jokes, and subtle physical contact that escalate over time. Sabrina, desperate for belonging, didn't realize she was being manipulated. Instead, she became increasingly dependent on Kevin, mistaking his control for affection. Friends, however, saw the red flags. They described the dynamic as strange and touchy, with sexual jokes exchanged between foster father and daughter. These interactions should have been the first warnings, but they slipped by unnoticed by those who could have stepped in. The stage was set long before the violence erupted. Sabrina's past had primed her for manipulation, and Kevin seized on that weakness, weaving a web of dependency that would later prove catastrophic. By the time the truth became undeniable, the damage was irreversible. Sabrina's troubled history made her cling to the distorted version of love Kevin offered, even as it pushed her toward unthinkable actions. The line between foster father and predator had blurred completely, leaving no room for Sabrina to see the situation clearly. As her attachment to Kevin deepened, so did the danger. What started as emotional manipulation would soon spiral into something far worse, a bond so toxic that it would drive Sabrina to take a life. The next chapter of this story would reveal just how far Kevin was willing to go to maintain control, and how effortlessly Sabrina, conditioned by years of instability, fell into his trap. Have you ever seen an adult-child relationship that gave you an uneasy feeling? What did you do? Kevin Cannell didn't just push boundaries, he destroyed them. What started as emotional support for a troubled teen twisted into something far darker. Behind the facade of family dinners and holiday photos, he cultivated a secret affair with Sabrina, manipulating her trust in ways no foster father ever should. His marriage to Lisa was crumbling, and in Sabrina, he saw an opportunity. He confided in her about wanting a divorce, planting the idea that Lisa stood in the way of their happiness. The more he whispered these things to Sabrina, the more she internalized them, reshaping her perception of reality to fit his lies. The breaking point came when Lisa discovered messages between Kevin and Sabrina, intimate, explicit exchanges that shattered any illusion of normalcy. When she confronted them, Kevin turned the tables. He dismissed her concerns, calling her paranoid and unstable, making her question whether she was imagining things. This was classic gaslighting, a tactic experts say is common in abusive relationships. By making Lisa doubt her own judgment, Kevin kept control over the narrative. But Lisa wasn't the only one he manipulated. Sabrina, already isolated and dependent on him, absorbed his words as truth. A friend later testified that Kevin openly admitted to the affair weeks before the murder. He even laughed about how easy it was to control Sabrina, joking about the power he held over her. This chilling admission revealed the calculated nature of his manipulation. He wasn't just engaging in an affair, he was engineering Sabrina's complete dependence, making her believe that violence was the only way to secure their future. Experts in betrayal trauma note that this kind of psychological control can warp a victim's sense of right and wrong, convincing them that extreme actions are justified. Lisa's resistance only made things worse. The more she pushed back, the more Kevin tightened his grip on Sabrina, reinforcing the idea that Lisa was the enemy. He spun a web in which Sabrina saw herself as a victim and murder as the only way out. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was the culmination of years of conditioning, of Kevin's careful dismantling of Sabrina's ability to think independently. She didn't act alone. She acted under the weight of his influence, convinced that if Lisa were gone, she and Kevin could finally be together. Kevin didn't just manipulate Sabrina, he weaponized her. He twisted her love and trust into something dark, something that could justify bloodshed. He didn't need to give explicit orders. The seeds he planted were enough. The whispered complaints about Lisa, the reminders that she was in their way, the constant reinforcement that they belonged together. By the time the violence erupted, Sabrina had lost the ability to question him. Lisa's suspicions had grown too loud to ignore, and Kevin knew his lies would unravel if she kept pushing. But instead of facing a messy divorce, he offered a solution disguised as salvation. He didn't directly tell Sabrina to kill. He made her believe it was the only option. And with that belief festering in her mind, the stage was set for a night that would leave one woman dead, another facing prison, and a predator finally exposed for what he truly was. The web of deceit was so tangled that even after the bloodshed, Sabrina couldn't see the truth. She still believed in Kevin, still thought they were victims rather than perpetrators. But the evidence didn't lie. The text messages, the testimony, the sheer brutality of the crime, all of it pointed to a man who had spent years grooming his victim for a moment like this. When Lisa took her last breath, it wasn't just Sabrina who held the knife. It was Kevin too, whispering in the shadows, pulling the strings until the very end. Do you think Kevin ever actually loved Sabrina, or was it all about control? Share your thoughts in the comments. On November 12, 2012, Lisa Cannell's life ended in a brutal attack inside her own home. Kevin was conveniently away at work when Sabrina entered the master bedroom armed with a knife. What followed wasn't just a murder, it was an eruption of violence so extreme it left investigators stunned. Sabrina later claimed to remember little of that night, but the crime scene told its own story: bent blades, walls splattered with blood, and defensive wounds that showed just how hard Lisa had fought for her life. At 1:17 a.m., the household was jolted awake by screams. Lisa's 13-year-old daughter, Megan, rushed to her mother's room and saw Sabrina in the midst of the attack. Lisa was still fighting back, her hands slashed from grabbing at the knife in a desperate attempt to survive. The blood was everywhere on the walls, the floor soaked into the bedding. The weapon, a 15-inch serrated knife, had been bent from the sheer force of the stabbing. Forensic reports showed the extent of Lisa's injuries: 178 stab wounds to her head, neck, torso, and extremities. Some wounds were so deep they severed major arteries. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was overkill, a frenzy that spoke of something far darker than anger. Megan called 911, her voice pleading for the attack to stop as she watched her mother being butchered. When police arrived, they found Sabrina still clutching the knife, covered in blood. She had small cuts on her hands and legs, likely from Lisa's struggles, but those were nothing compared to what she had done. Sabrina was incoherent, sobbing, offering no real explanation for the horror she had just unleashed. She claimed she only remembered going into Lisa's room for medication, an impossible claim given the bloodbath she had left behind. The brutality of the attack raised disturbing questions. Why stab someone 178 times? Forensics showed that many of the wounds were repetitive, inflicted with such force that the blade bent under the strain. Psychiatrists who later studied the case noted that this level of violence often stems from extreme psychological manipulation. The sheer number of stab wounds suggested not just intent to kill, but a complete detachment from the humanity of the victim. Sabrina didn't just attack Lisa, she obliterated her as if erasing her existence was the only way to free herself from Kevin's web. Kevin had spent months grooming Sabrina, convincing her that Lisa was the obstacle to their happiness. The more Lisa resisted his manipulations, the more Sabrina saw her as the enemy. Murder became the solution Kevin had subtly planted in Sabrina's mind. He didn't need to give direct orders. His whispers about divorce, his complaints about Lisa, the way he framed their relationship as star-crossed lovers, all of it pushed Sabrina toward violence. When she finally acted, it wasn't just rage driving the knife, it was loyalty, twisted into something monstrous by the man who claimed to love her. When police arrived, Sabrina's blank stare hid the reality. This wasn't just her crime, it was Kevin's too. The messages, the manipulation, the years of psychological control, all of it had led to this moment. The knife may have been in Sabrina's hand, but Kevin's fingerprints were all over the crime. As the investigation unfolded, the real question wasn't just why Sabrina had done it, but how much of the violence had been scripted long before the first blow was ever struck. The truth would come out, piece by piece, revealing a betrayal so deep it turned a home into a slaughterhouse. What do you think Sabrina believed in the final moments before the attack? Did she think she was saving herself or saving Kevin? Let us know in the comments. Kevin Cannell didn't mourn. He got to work. Within days of Lisa's murder, he began donating her belongings to Goodwill and listing her bedroom furniture for sale on Craigslist. His actions were methodical, as if erasing any trace of her was part of a broader plan. Investigators noted how quickly he moved, how little hesitation he showed in disposing of the life they had shared. But the most telling detail came when he cashed in Lisa's life insurance policies, totaling $785,000, an act that would later become central to proving his motives weren't just personal, but financial. Kevin's demeanor after the murder raised immediate red flags. Officers found his calmness unsettling, especially when he showed more concern for Sabrina's jail conditions than for Lisa's autopsy results. When asked about his wife, his responses were detached, almost clinical. He spoke of her death with no visible grief, only a strange preoccupation with practical matters, like the insurance money and what would happen to Sabrina. This wasn't the reaction of a grieving husband. It was the behavior of someone who had expected this outcome, someone who stood to gain from it. Sabrina's eventual confession peeled back the layers of Kevin's manipulation. She admitted he had promised her a life together, detailed discussions where they talked about the insurance money and how it would fund their future. The pieces fit together too neatly to be coincidence. Text messages between them revealed Kevin's cold calculations. "Dashan, could you really do it if I ask?" he had written. The question alone showed intent, but the context was worse. He had researched murder methods, planting the idea in Sabrina's mind, as if it were just another step in their secret plan. Betrayal doesn't just shatter trust, it rewires lives, as the Cannell case proves. This tragedy forces us to confront how predators exploit vulnerability, leveraging silence and manipulation. Jennifer Freyd's research on betrayal trauma explains it. When those we depend on violate our trust, the damage runs deep. Grooming thrives in darkness, but awareness can stop it. Organizations like NCMEC and Darkness to Light offer resources to recognize and report abuse. If this story unsettles you, let it also move you to act. Share it. Watch for red flags. The next warning sign you notice could save someone from a fate like Lisa's. This wasn't just a crime, it was a long con masked as love. Tell us in the comments, who do you think is the real villain in this story, and why?